Hello, I'm Dan Anderson, Associate Professor and Extension Specialist in the Agricultural and Biosystems Engineering Department at Iowa State University. And today I'm going to be talking about managing manure, what's next in manure, and specifically talking about how we handle some of that variability and just unknowns about manure. So, as we think about what we're going to do, I'm going to talk just some manure basics. We're going to work through some Iowa manure budgets. What's that mean for selecting application rates? And then we're going to get to the fun part of this. Where's that variability come from? There are things I don't know, like how much nutrient is actually in that load of manure compared to the one before it. And what are the things we can do to try and improve our manure utilization decision relative to all that stuff? Okay, so manure systems have to handle lots of things. And because of that, everyone is a little bit different. So when I think about manure systems, there's really five things that need to be accomplished. We got to keep that manure in the barn, somehow figure out how we're going to get it into our manure storage. If we're going to do any treatment, we have to do it then. Every manure storage is a little bit different, located at a different place. And then we have to figure out how we're going to use it, get it to the place we're going to use it, and try and get it applied. So I walk you through on the left there some of the things that have to happen in those. And then on the right, I'm just trying to show you some pictures. So the top one there is just a beautiful Holstein dairy cows that makes me reminisce of growing up in Wisconsin, sitting in that sand, right? And cows are mean. They kick that sand into the manure. And next thing you know, we have manure sand and we put it in our storage. And how does that impact where our manure ends up? How are we going to collect manure there? Are we going to have a scraper behind our cows? Or are we going to run a skid steer with a tire bucket pushing manure? Do we try and flush it? Everything we do changes those manure properties and makes every farm unique. And that's a blessing and a curse. It means we never get the same fertilizer product twice. And that's what makes my job both fun and challenging. So, this is just another conceptualization of where stuff's happening. And there's a lot of different decisions that we can make everywhere along that pathway. With that said, while the front end is fun, right? How do we feed it? What does that mean for manure? We can make different storage decisions. Where we're going to focus is really where that corn is growing and on our application decisions. What's the nutrient content as we measure it in the storage? What does that mean for what we should be putting on? And we're going to only look at that section while the rest of it's fun. That's where the business end is made, right? That's where we're all trying to make our living, trying to help people do better. So the fundamental question that we always ask or should be asking is my livestock or poultry operation concentrating nutrients? And really to me, this is super engineering, right? I drew a control diagram, a nice box, put some stuff in the box. There's red arrows, red bad stuff happening, right? Air emissions, losses to either surface or groundwater. And all we're really trying to do is balance the inputs and outputs as best we can. So we're trying to say, this is the stuff I brought on, and this is the stuff I'm trying to turn it into or utilize it as a product, right? And specifically on a field, our input is normally how do we make fertilizer choices, either commercial fertilizers or manure, and how do we match that with the stuff we're going to try and harvest to make sure we're doing as best we can for the environment and for our clients as they try and farm as productively as possible. So in manure, there's really two parts to determining application rates. There's the supply side of it. That's how much stuff is in the manure. And I really look at three factors for that. It's concentration, how much nitrogen's in that manure, its availability, how much can I take advantage of during this growing season and the next growing seasons, and then how am I putting it on to make sure that it's staying in that soil until my crop can use it. And then there's a demand side. There's a how much does that crop actually need to grow to its best capability this given year? And that's dependent on things like crop rotation, weather, soil, and it's the stuff that the real soil scientists, the agronomists get you. And for manure, we have to think about this for at least two nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus. We can think about it beyond that, potassium, maybe sulfur. For how are we balancing all these things, right? And while I'm going to talk mostly today about nitrogen and phosphorus, the other ones can matter in terms of our production. So on that nutrient supply side, there's two types of nutrients. There's organic nutrients, so things that come attached to carbon, and then there's inorganic nutrients. So if you think about your traditional fertilizer purchases, anhydrous ammonia, it's all in that inorganic form. It's immediately available. Manure gets to be unique because sometimes large chunks of it come in that organic form. Right here, we could give you the standard extension answer of it depends when you ask how much of that's going to be available. And it does depend on lots of things, many things outside our control. What type of manure are we working with? What's the storage look like? How long did it sit in storage? Have you done anything special to it, like solid separation? Or did you choose to compost it back in on the back end? What's the soil look like? Are you tilling? Are you no tilling? What's the temperature profile? How wet is that soil? All these things matter. And we have control over very little of them. And the solution to that has really been using this table value. So it comes from PMR using 10003, using manure nutrients for crop production. Uh, and it gives you first, second, and third year availability. And those vary by manure type, and we're giving our best estimates for what typical manures look like. If you're doing something special with your manure, or if for whatever reason I have a deep pit swine barn and I keep sampling it and the thing comes out at 50% ammonia nitrogen, 50% organic nitrogen, I might look at this table and say, I don't think I can get 100% of my nitrogen from that type of manure. Those things happen, and we should be trying to adjust for them, gain certainty in what we're doing, and feel better about the fertilizer decisions that we make. Many states are moving back to this Midwest plan service style recommendation, which I'm trying to illustrate on the light, right? Where when you sample your manure, all that ammonium is first year available. It's already in a form we know plants can utilize. And we just have to start claiming some credit for our organic nitrogen. And depending on how it's been stored beforehand, the diet that we've been fed, we can choose different mineralization factors. And this is coming more into play at big dairies, especially where we might be doing things like anaerobically digesting our manure, where we might be doing solid liquid separation and want to make different nitrogen recommendations for the solid fraction that comes out of that solid liquid separated manure and the liquid fraction that comes out of that separated manure. And this organic nitrogen mineralization technique, adding in the ammoniacal nitrogen that we have, is one way to better account for some of those things we might be doing for our manure to have a recommendation that is more tailored to our manure handling processes rather than more general for what a typical handling practice might be or what we often see in Iowa. Application methods matter a lot. Just because you say I'm doing injection or I'm incorporating, the question really we should be asking really is how well is that technique working on our farm? How well does that relate to what I think I should be claiming for that value? Again, the values that we see in this come from PMR 1003, and they're based on what we think it should be on average. But there's some caveats, right? So, how long was it sitting there before I got injected? What was the weather actually like when I was doing it? I think what I want you to think about is how to feel empowered to adjust maybe those values slightly from that table based on that. So, I wanted to work through just an example on calculating manure nutrient supply. In this case, I said I have a deep pit pig manure, probably swine finishing manure. I did a manure sample and I got back that it was testing at 60 pounds of nitrogen per thousand gallons. The availability recommendations that come from Iowa State are 90 to 100%. Personally, I like 100%. I know a lot of people out there take 90% as a precaution, but it probably is 100% generally with our growing seasons. I said I was going to do injections, so it's going to be 99% retained. So we're going to take that 60 times whatever we assume for availability, in this case zero point 0.9 times the 0.99. And for every 1,000 gallons of manure we put on, we're going to say that we're supplying 53, right? That's our best guess of what we're getting out of that based on what we sampled was in the manure, knowing that there's some variation about that. If I get back a test that says 60, what do I think the real number is? Plus or minus 5, plus or minus 10, somewhere in there. Some availability estimate. 90 is probably low for swine manure. 100 is as high as it can be. Are we somewhere in between? And then how good was my injection actually done, right? Do I feel like I got it all covered? I had to pick up potentially my drag line as I was applying on the end rows. I splashed it. Did I come back and incorporate that to make sure that nitrogen was still there, or did I leave it on the surface? How should I be adjusting to best crop that field based on what was actually happening during my application? In terms of nutrient demand, Iowa State over the years has really supported two different methodologies for estimating yield. The oldest methodology is the yield goal method. Iowa State stopped supporting that at roughly 2005, 2006 when they switched over to the crop response method or the maximum return to nitrogen method. So the yield goal method is really what the manure management plan form walks farmers through. It says, how much do you expect to harvest next year based on your proven yields, making some adjustments for past growing conditions, and then multiplying by a factor of how much nitrogen we think we might need for bushel of production or ton of production. The crop response method is really based on empirical data. So we need lots of yield response curves. Ideally, they'd be specific to your farm or field or production practice. And I think that is what the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative is working towards. But historically, we've seen that for two parts of Iowa, we get two different crop responses, right? So there's the main region of Iowa, and then Southeast Iowa got broke out specifically because it seemed to respond a little bit differently to nitrogen. But it really does rely on that empirical data. So with the yield goal method, hopefully people have seen it before. We no longer support this method. for various reasons, right? When you look at maybe how much nitrogen's been needed according to MRTN, it doesn't really correspond to yield, or at least it doesn't correspond to yield as strongly as this methodology would work you through. I mention it mostly because it is still used for 98% of manure plans that are written. And because of that, I think it's important for us to think about really what it means. And when you look at what's been happening, it really is we pick a reasonable yield, you either get to pick the average of the last 5 years plus 10%, or the average of the last 4 out of the last 5 years. If you think about how much yield we're actually going to have, this methodology tends to overpredict what your yield will be, whether using the 5 year average plus 10% or for the last 5 years. It's not really a great method for picking yield. It's not how I would predict yield for next year, but it is what has been recommended to us in this methodology. The other thing it does is, especially for corn production, is it breaks Iowa into 3 different regions: zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. And for each zone, it gives a nitrogen use rate factor, how many pounds of nitrogen we think we should put on to grow a bushel of corn. So Northwest Iowa there is at about zero point 0.9 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. Central Iowa is at about 1.2 pounds per bushel. When this methodology was developed, there was roughly 8 tenths of a pound of nitrogen in a bushel of corn. Today, there's roughly 6 tenths of a pound of nitrogen in a bushel of corn, right? So we have less nitrogen in a bushel today than when the methodology was developed, but we didn't see any adjustment to those nitrogen use rate factors. I think the other thing to say about that is when you look maybe where we fall at a state average, if we're in a continuous corn rotation, most of the data we see suggests that we're probably doing better than that 1.2 pounds of nitrogen per bushel. We've seen a lot of genetic potential increase from yield. Newer hybrids just don't have as much nitrogen in that bushel of corn for various reasons. So maybe this isn't the best methodology for predicting how much nitrogen we need for our next growing season anymore. There might be ways to tailor this methodology, to tinker with it to make it more reasonable of a prediction. It's probably not what I'd recommend using anymore. Certainly, I won't fault anyone filling out manure plans with it. It gives you some cushion so that you can pick the rate you want, since this tends to be higher than what other methodologies pick. But do keep that in mind that it's really more of a nitrogen limitation tool. How much nitrogen could I be allowed to put on, rather than a nitrogen recommendation tool of how much nitrogen should I be putting on. If you're using that method, they still have what they call the legume credit. I think maybe we'd call this more of a rotation effect these days, but if you do have a legume in your rotation, such as soybean or alfalfa, you should be crediting what was there. Since about 2005, 2006, Iowa State has been recommending this corn nitrogen rate calculator. These days, I think it's getting revised into a new production system, but it is still the tool we had. One disadvantage of this is it only has 2 yield response curves, one for corn after soybean, one for continuous corn. So if you have other things in your rotation, it's hard to use this methodology to predict how much nitrogen I need that next growing season. What you end up doing is going to the calculator, plugging in what you think the corn selling price is going to be, plugging in what a nitrogen price is going to be, and it will plot out both this graph and give you a table of a recommended rate of nitrogen as well as a range. And when I first started this job, I really liked that it gave me a rate. Like, that was the number we should use. If you know nothing else, it gives you, like, this is on average the number to pick. As I've grown as a scientist and as an extension specialist, trying to think about what these numbers mean, how they apply to different locations, the weather that we anticipate for that coming growing season, how we might predict different things responding, matters a lot, right? So if we start to have a wet spring and I put on right at that number, wet spring, I probably want to be a little bit higher. I might think about side dressing. If it's dry and I think nitrogen loss potential has been low, well, I can't go take nitrogen off, but I'm probably going to say I had sufficient nitrogen out there for the growing conditions I have this year. I should still be in good shape. And I think doing on-farm trials for the Iowa Nitrogen Initiative is really going to help expand maybe what this tool has been, going to look at a lot more different cropping locations and potentially different cropping systems where we see maybe more than just corn, soybean, or continuous corn, and can look at some of those other factors. Tillage or no-till, having cover crops or not having cover crops, maybe growing a small grain in there. So hopefully this tool will be something that's expanded to more production practices in the near future. All right, so I wanted to walk us through sort of that example of how to calculate an application rate. So we saw from that MRTN prediction that we wanted 134 pounds of nitrogen per acre. From our earlier swine manure example, we got 53 pounds of nitrogen per 1,000 gallons that we were applying. How much should we apply? So in this case, application rate is really that demand side. How much do I need divided by supply? So I'm taking 134 divided by 53 and then dividing that all by 1,000, or essentially multiplying by 1,000. and you come up with 2,500 gallons per acre. Yes, I have some change on there, but when you're setting application rates, think about what is really achievable and what level of specificity you can give to the people applying manure. And 2,500 gallons to acres is probably the rate that I would specify in that case. Okay, just another example. Let's say we had a 700 head beef finishing operation working with a bedded pack. I give you some manure characteristics there: 30 pounds of nitrogen, 45 pounds of P2O5 per ton. You're going to want to put, in this case, on 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. I was picking on a high range of MRTN essentially in that case. We're going to do surface application. So we're going to figure out our rate. And then I say, well, how much phosphorus comes along for the ride on this? And how does that compare to phosphorus removal if we have 200 bushel corn and 60 bushel an acre soybeans? And I won't work you through all the math. I'll let it pop up on this spreadsheet, but you can see that we derated for first year availability. It's a bedded pack manure. Beef cattle manure should be that 30 to 50% range since I'm a bedded pack. Lots of carbon, lots of extra carbon because I put bedding. I tend to be on the lower end of that range because I know I get nitrogen tie-up. I said I was going to leave it on the surface, so looking at that number, we got 77.5% retention, 22.5% volatilization. So how does it break down? And if you start multiplying those factors together, I was saying I'm taking credit for 8 pounds of nitrogen essentially for every pound of manure I put on. If I'm doing that, I wanted 150 pounds. I calculated an 18.5 ton rate in this case. All right, so I had that rate, right? And I put that on. How much phosphorus came along for the ride? In this case, we got 45 pounds of P2O5 per ton, right? That's what I specified in the problem. And we don't have to take into account volatilization. Phosphorus doesn't have a volatile form. Phosphorus is all first year availability, so we're not correcting for availability. And lo and behold, we put on 800 pounds of phosphorus per acre. So if you think about what that should be compared to, how much are we removing over that 2-year rotation? Well, if I grow 200 bushel corn and 60 bushel an acre beans, I only am taking off about 100 pounds of P2O5 per acre. So I put on 8 rotations worth of phosphorus all at once, right? So I put on 16 years of phosphorus all at once. So just when we're thinking about what our decisions are doing, how to make sure that we're getting most value from our manure, I think it's important to think about that. And if I'm not coming back to that field for quite a while in my manure application strategies, it works out great. If after I run that rotation, I come back and put on another 800 pounds of phosphorus and I'm only going to move 100 again, and then I'm building soil phosphorus quite quickly, right? And that's how we run into some of our manure issues where we might not be allowed to put manure on in the future because we trigger a phosphorus index. Okay, so I wanted to talk about variability, and a friend of mine called me up one day this spring, and he said, "Man, every year I'm growing less confident on the end power in manure, and would like to be able to just use it for my phosphorus needs and apply all commercial manure N." And I said, "Yeah, I understand. It is a tough system, right? Every year is different. Manure's variable. Sometimes it looks strange." And it still makes me sad when I heard that, right? Because part of my role, part of our role is to try and make sure that we're being as sustainable as possible, trying to make best use of our manure resources. And a big part of that is trying to claim credit for that manure nitrogen. So in the picture here, I'm just showing you an Iowa Nitrogen Initiative trial, and you can see very clearly where they had zero nitrogen. You might be able to look at that picture and even pick out a few plots where they had lower rates of nitrogen rather than their full rate. But at least when I look at it, I can see the zeros really clearly. And then a bunch of the other stuff sort of blurs together, right? So that's really what we're trying to do with a lot of the uncertainty and trying to manage for it, right? We don't necessarily have to hit the perfect number or the right number. We have sort of a range that we're trying to hit where we're going to be near the top of that production. We're not going to cause environmental harm. And how do we adjust to make sure we're trying to get that number, right? So we're going to talk through why is manure maybe a little bit more challenging than some other things, and what can we do about it. In my opinion matters, but I think your opinions matter too. So this last year, we asked confinement sites, so those farms using their own manure for crop production, what source of variability or uncertainty is most important to you in selecting manure application rates? And we got a fair number of responses here. I'm trying to show what the percentage of them were. Number one thing that we got back was knowledge or consistency in nutrient content. And I wish I would have asked that both ways. Are they just not sure what's in their manure, or is it really that consistency of the manure? But that came back number one, right? So lots of people worried about load to load variation, knowing how much nitrogen is actually in their manure. I understand some of those struggles. I send off a fair number of manure samples to a commercial lab every year, and a lot of them come back and I say, that number looks pretty good to me, and I trust it. And every now and then maybe 1 or 2% of my samples come back and say, I can't believe that number. It just doesn't look true. That manure can't have that much nitrogen, or that manure has to have more nitrogen than that. And I suppose if I think long and hard about it, and I didn't have a library of mostly manures that I thought should be testing the same number, I'd get samples back from the lab and wonder, is this a random number generator sometimes, right? Because it's 50, and then the next one will be 40. Luckily, I often send multiple samples from the same manure pit, and the ones at 50 probably cluster ±5, and the ones that are 40 probably cluster ±5. But every now and then I do get one that's a little bit more different. And when I have a few of them, I feel confident in saying my real number was still here, but it is a challenge. The other thing that was pointed out was uniformity of application. We'll try talking through that, the ability to hit low application rates, especially in manure timing relative to crop demand. I asked commercial manure applicators the same question. They answered relatively similarly. About the only big difference that we saw here is they added a category for me, and it was on my other survey. It just didn't come up in those cases where people were using their own manure. But in this case, commercial applicators were really worried about field conditions after application, probably something that their clients comment on or talk to them about. So it showed up a lot more in this case than in the other cases. But overall, the other things all got similar amounts of responses. And then what do I say? And in some respects, I thought long about this hard and I have things to say, and I'm going to say them in a minute. But what I say doesn't actually matter. Your customer's perception and your perception drives reality, right? You're the one making the manure utilization decision. So if you or your client believes that's where an issue is and maybe choose to put on a little insurance fertilizer because of that issue, that's what matters. So my perception isn't going to change that. But I do think part of my role and your role in those manure decisions is trying to build some trust, right? And if we can trust manure a little bit better, we'll make improved fertilization decisions. So I think that's really important for us to try and do year in, year out. Try and play with those numbers just a little bit to grow more confident in them. So I wanted to talk about this a little bit. If you don't trust it, especially if you don't trust the nitrogen, the rational thing to do and what most people I think do in this state is put on a little insurance nitrogen. It's hard to diagnose extra nitrogen if you don't take water quality sampling, right? So it covers up a lot of that uncertainty, a lot of that variation. And in our crop field, when we go look at it or drive by, we don't see it. If we test what's coming out in the tile lines, we will see it. So hopefully you're doing the things you need to do to evaluate how things are looking in season, scouting, looking at what that meant for your nitrogen availability. And one thing that has been on my mind quite a bit recently as I've looked at some of these issues and how the state is evolving is if we don't do a better job of utilizing maybe the manure nutrients than we are right now, we're going to have to look towards treating and separating and trying to generate fertilizer products from our manure. And historically, I've been resistant to that approach. It feels different, and that part that it's just different doesn't bother me a lot, but it's very costly, both in terms of the amount of labor it's going to take on the farm and monetarily to buy those systems and get them set up. We have seen farms in neighboring states look towards those and use them, but it will be a different version of using it. And if you don't trust manure, well, if it's generating a product that looks much more like commercial fertilizers, it's much easier to trust. And that might be a viable method forward if we can't find ways to trust manure as we're using it now. All right. So, what I say about this, and certainly everything I say is subject to change as we learn new things, do new research. But really, when I'm looking at it, it's timing. It matters a lot, except in years where it doesn't, right? So, when we're dry, field conditions after application, based on what the commercial applicators responded there, I think that's really important because perception, as we've said, is reality. Variation in nitrogen need in a specific year. That wasn't something that came up in the question I asked there. But if you ask me the right amount of nitrogen this growing season, right now I'd say it's MRTN plus or minus whatever happens in that year, right? So there's some variation about that. And I think we are going to have challenges to struggle to hit lower application rates. We've seen it already with deep pit swine manure as we continue to do a better job with water management. Those issues get more important. And then uniformity of application, nutrient consistency certainly matters. So I'm going to try and show you some pieces of equipment that people are using or that are on the verge of being used to try and address some of these challenges. So in terms of manure timing, this figure comes from Mike Castellano. I think he did a great job putting it together. And really, it's doing is trying to illustrate when does stuff become available, that red curve. So when does it mineralize from manure or soil organic matter relative to when our row crop, that corn or soybean really do a good job of taking up those nutrients. And there's a mismatch, right? For the most part, crops don't really take off until late June, July, when we really get high levels of nutrient uptake. And we've seen soil mineralization peak before that. We'll often see manure nutrient mineralization or nitrification peak before that. So some of that is just a mismatch in timing, and one that, at least for manure, I think we can manage a little bit with when we're putting our manure on. So we did some work up at Nashua. It was 4 above average moisture years, and we saw a huge yield response to timing. So I have EFM, early fall manure, LFM, late fall manure. So by moving from early fall, roughly the beginning of October, to late fall, we were able to grow 50 bushel an acre more corn. In this case, all of my nitrogen was coming from that manure when I was putting it on, and I was aiming for roughly 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre. And that was roughly in line with what maximum return to nitrogen is, at least on average for the state. I've got some data we'll look at later for what it was for Nashua during those growing seasons and a few before it. And now when I look at that data, I say I was probably shorting my corn nitrogen to start with, and it makes me extremely responsive for where I'm going to be. The other treatment we had there was a spring UAN, so not the manure as the same fertilizer source, but again, just looking at timing and the same rate. And we got about another 20 bushels from moving from late fall or well-timed fall manure to spring. And if you start thinking about where that puts us on a yield response curve, or at least one way to think about it, with that spring manure, I was right around 150. I'm pretty much at the maximum what I thought the MRTN curve was. And if I start looking at where I was with late fall or early fall manure, those are those 2 red dots. And I was getting credit for maybe half of my nitrogen or almost none of my nitrogen in that case. And that got me really interested in how can we improve manure timing. And here I'm just showing one version of what we're doing right now with that. That's a 360 rain. We're working on a side dressing project, putting manure onto standing corn throughout the growing season. It's an option. I don't know if it's the right option or the right option for everyone at this time, but it is something that I thought, given this data, was worth pursuing. I also wanted to illustrate the water quality data that we sort of had with this. So that early fall manure, we had 2 treatments with and without a cereal rye cover crop. So plus rye meant it had that cover crop on it. With the cover crop, we got a great water quality response. We were able to reduce the amount of nitrate making it to the tile line by about half. But you can also see that by moving that nitrogen application timing, we got a significant water quality change, right? Going from in the fall, where we were averaging 20, that late fall, we got about a 25% reduction just by moving it from a month. And if you were moving it maybe to that spring or a spring side dress, we got another about 25% reduction, right? Or a third reduction. So timing mattered a lot for water quality in those 4 years of that study. I will admit that we continued that study for another 3 years. We got rid of the early fall manure and only worked with late fall manure. And it was 3 years of droughty conditions. And I saw no yield response to timing and no difference in nitrate loss with timing. And that makes a lot of sense, right? If we have that water moving through the soil, it mattered a lot. If we didn't have water moving through the soil causing leaching, it didn't matter much at all. This is just some data that we've summarized from a site in Minnesota. It shows almost the same thing. There's a huge improvement from moving from fall to spring on average, and a small improvement from moving from spring to side dress. But this isn't something unique to this site. It is something that you can see at lots of sites, and it matters more when you're maybe a little bit on the short side of nitrogen rather than in that higher ranges of nitrogen. The next thing I wanted to talk about was variation in nitrogen need. And the figure on the left there comes from Mitch and Mike Castellano again. They've been doing some great illustrative work on how the maximum return to nitrogen or economic optimum nitrogen rate has been changing as a function of time. Both have been increasing, but what was really important to me here is sort of the green bar or the yellow bar give an indication of how variable is that within a year and as a function of time. And there's a lot of variability in that. The graph on the right is really soil organic matter mineralization as a function of growing season and time. And the black line, the solid, really dark one, shows you what it is on average. And all the gray lines illustrate what it is in any given growing season over the last 30 years based on modeling results. So there's just a lot of variation in what's happening there. And that got me looking at Nashua specific, right? So these are the yield response curves in Nashua. So for the one labeled corn, that would be continuous corn rotation. And on the x-axis, you're looking at pounds of nitrogen per acre. And the blue dots highlight where that economic optimum was in any given growing season. So in that continuous corn rotation at Nashua, it says that any given year there, our economic optimum was a little over 200, all the way up to 300 pounds of nitrogen per acre, right? So sort of 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre range. In the soybean one, it was a little under 200, maybe that 170-ish area, all the way up to somewhere around 250 pounds per acre. And I bring that up because that's what we're really trying to do is figure out how much nitrogen we need in any given year, right? So when you think about how much variation is manure adding, how much variation is because of crop response curves in any given year, well, there's a lot of it that we need to do a better job of figuring out how much nitrogen our corn crop is going to need in that coming year. And we end up blaming some of this on manure. And I did it, right? I looked at Nashua and said, man, timing is really important. And now I look at these curves, which occurred at the same time I was doing those studies, and say, timing is really important. And it turns out I was on the lower end of those nitrogen response curves. So timing, any loss of nitrogen, the impact of it gets really amplified in my yield response data. But sort of understanding how those two interact and work together helps understand what that data means or is telling us with a lot more integrity and with a lot more value of what we might want to do going forward, I think. I did want to comment on ability to hit rate. So up at Nashua, we were in that 2,000 to 3,000 gallon an acre range. And every year, every plot we've done this on, we're able to be within 5% of that number. So pretty darn good. But I do get that there's some challenges as we try and go from 2,000 down to hitting a 2,000 gallon an acre number. I think this is in part technological, but for the most part, we can hit those numbers. It's that when you see sort of this response or what I might charge you to hit those rates, that people get concerned, right? So if you're at 4,000 gallons an acre, you might be paying 1.85 cents a gallon. If we get higher nutrient concentration manure, that number, in theory, at least should be two little over 2 cents, almost 2.2 cents a gallon. And we start thinking about the math of a swine farm and what they have to pay for total manure application. That sometimes sounds challenging. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if we get there and can use our manure as our only fertilizer source, that does keep lowering our fertilizer cost per acre. But it does make our manure application bill look high and makes us wonder why our application price per gallon might be higher than others. Uh, so that is a real challenge, especially as we ask people to hit some of those low rates. The part that worries me more at some of those low rates is how uniform we are across the toolbar. This is just an example of every manure spreader has a manifold there, trying to distribute manure across the toolbar. As you dial down some of those flow rates, so it's harder to keep pressure in the manifold, you get things that look like this, where that manure distribution isn't as uniform, right? So that matters a lot more in certain manifolds than others. Here's just two examples that we tested. One we're going to call a crescent moon. So it had outlets on half of the moon. There's plates inside that you can adjust. And no matter what we did on that manifold, at some of those lower rates, 2,000, 3,000, even 4,000 gallons an acre, we might see a knife to knife variation of 50%. So if you have a knife to knife variation of 50%, that means when I look at one knife, half as much flow is coming out of the knife right next to it, generally, right? That's roughly what it's saying, at least. So that's a lot of variation in how much your nitrogen your corn crop growing right next to that band of nitrogen might be able to receive. Certainly, there's other manifolds. In this case, it was a full circle manifold with a hydraulic motor in there and a spinner chopper pump that helps block and clear the outlets periodically. And it did roughly within 10%. And I think at 10%, that's roughly what we say that anhydrous toolbars should be calibrated to hit from knife to knife variation. We're probably doing okay. But I think one of the concerns that people have had as they move to more low rates probably is more related to this uniformity than the ability to actually hit the low rate with their piece of equipment, and maybe related to what it's costing us. So a couple things to keep in mind there. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about what do we do with this variability, right? So we can sort of say, where do we think people are at for nitrogen content? How much variation is there? What happens if availability ranges from 95 plus or minus 5%? Or if I move from injection to a surface application, or if I move from a broadcast to an incorporation. And there are certainly things that we can do to minimize some of these. And I think the big ones that I look at is if you can do things to get your manure in the soil, right? We can lower that volatilization number, but we're also reducing uncertainty as we do that. If I inject instead of surface apply, I've reduced the variability I'm going to see in my field. If I can move timing from maybe early fall to late fall or even to spring or in season, I'm more sure of what the weather conditions are. I've reduced my chances of loss. Or if I choose pieces of equipment that are more uniform, I can do a better job. But there are some things that we have less control over, we've been less able to measure. For instance, variation in nitrogen content as we're applying, uh, especially before we had things like the harvest lab that might help us out with that. Uh, can show a lot of variation, right? And we didn't have great measurements to know where we're doing. So I've been trying to think about how do we do something with this? What does it mean for changing rates? So I developed a little stochastic model, which essentially means it's like playing the slots or roulette, right? I say these are the average numbers that I'm going to put in, and then I say what happens if I pick from a distribution and say what really happens, how much nitrogen would I have, and because we have yield response curves, we can say what does that mean for how much corn I'd actually grow. So I did this over and over and over again, roughly 5,000 times, playing with a lot of inputs to try and see where we'd come out on average. And I made a graph that looks something like this. So on the x-axis, I'm plotting knife to knife variation between 0 in this case and 100%. We saw that the best equipment that we could generally get for knife to knife variation was sort of in that 10% range. I would say an average piece of equipment maybe was in that 35% range. And then maybe the really poor equipment is in that 100% range. And I did this for 4 different cases, mostly built off my Nashua data because that's where I had the best yield response curve data and really had some data to estimate what the impact of timing was. So I did 4 different treatments. I did a spring applied swine manure in a corn soybean rotation. That's in the blue. A fall applied deep pit swine manure, injected again in that corn soybean rotation. And then I did the same thing for a spring and a fall. And what I found here really was interesting to me, that until you got to about 35, 40% of variation, the impact that it had on how much nitrogen you should be putting on was relatively minimal. So if MRTN was 150, I probably wanted to be 5 pounds higher than that, right? If my knife to knife variability got above 150, I think oftentimes what we choose to do is say, "Ah, I need more nitrogen to cover up what's happening." And maybe if you side dress with the different sources of nitrogen, you can do that. If your solution is, I'm just going to put manure on and hope for the best, you don't really make an improvement. You end up putting more manure where you don't want it, and you don't get enough manure in those rows where you wanted it. Now, if it's adjusting your knife to knife variability as you do that, there's a chance for improvement. But the other thing it really illustrated to me is, at least on based on using that Nashua curve for the first 4 years of data, was timing mattered so much to me, much more than I wanted to see it matter, much more than I hoped it would matter. And I think that's true. It did matter a lot up there, mostly because I was on the low end of that nitrogen response curve, right? So all these things matter. And as we look towards the future, I think we are getting manure equipment that's better able to hit rate. I think there's technologies, I'm playing with that Harvest Lab and having good results with it, that might help reduce the uncertainty on some of those things. And the next frontier really is on making sure that the amount of nitrogen we think we need in any growing season gets narrowed down. So how can we adjust based on this year rather than compared to an average year? So with that, thank you for your time today. It was great to have a conversation with you about some of these variations. Hopefully I gave you some ideas about things you can do about it. In some case, that might be purchasing new pieces of equipment, choosing to alter your equipment to better manage some of those. But at least some of them are decisions that we get to make relative to timing or relative to how much nitrogen do we think we need to use. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, you can follow me on our socials. We try and get information out on that. You can join the Iowa Manure Management Action Group, getting a newsletter about what's happening in the world of manure. Or if you just like hearing me talk crap, you can get a lot more information about manure on our podcast. So with that, thank you for your time today, and I appreciated the chance to talk with you.